Welcome back to the final edition of the Lynne Hayes Freeland Show. I feel like I have to keep saying final so that it'll sink in that this is it. When I'm done today, I am done. But you know, over the course of doing this show, I've had a chance to meet all kinds of greats. Most of the time, I wasn't intimidated, I wasn't nervous. But when I met Pittsburgh's own Billy Eckstine, I was almost giddy.
It is always a pleasure when you have a guest that needs absolutely no introduction, and that's exactly what I have tonight. Billy Eckstine, welcome to Vibrations.
Thank you, darling. I thought you were going to say, needs no introduction, so to hell with it.
You have accomplished so much. What to you is your biggest contribution to jazz, to music?
I don't know, really, what the contribution is. I guess my own style of singing, probably. But I never thought of it as a contribution as such. What you try to do is be honest with what you're doing.
So people like to ask me all the time, you know, who was my favorite interview, who made me nervous? And for the most part, I can honestly say I never got nervous when I was doing an interview, but there were a few times that I felt a little intimidated because the guest was so focused, so laser focused on whatever the subject matter was. And that's exactly what I found every time I interviewed August Wilson.
I started going to Central Catholic, and I went from Central Catholic, I went to Connolly Trade School, and all the while I was living right across the street from Gladstone High School. But my mother did not think you got a very good education in public schools, which is why she sent me to Central Catholic.
Okay.
And then she sent me to Connolly to learn how to do something with my hands. And so finally she allowed me to go to Gladstone. I went to Gladstone, and I was in the 9th grade, but I was taking 10th grade subjects. And I had a teacher there, and we had an assignment, and I wrote a paper on Napoleon, which got my sister to type up. It was about 20 pages long. It was a very good paper. I went to the library, did a lot of research, and the upshot of it all was they didn't believe that I had written a paper, and they wanted me to justify the fact that I had written it too. And I didn't feel it was necessary other than the fact that I said I wrote it. And so he had an A+ and an E, both written on the paper, and he circled the E and handed it back to me. And I took the paper, tore it up, and put it in his wastebasket and walked out of the school. And never went back. But the next morning I got up and I went and played basketball right in front of the principal's office. And as I look back on it now, of course, I wanted the principal to come out and say, "Why aren't you in school?" I wanted this particular teacher to maybe notice after a week or so that I hadn't come back, and there was a potentially, maybe he could watch me in the class and find out if I'd written the paper or whatnot. But nothing ever happened. And I waited for the truant officers to come, because I was 15 at the time, you know, and say, "How come you're in school?" Nobody ever asked. And, but I think as Lee Kerboy put it, I was dropped out of school, but you didn't drop out of life. And I went from there to Carnegie Library in Hazelwood, and I suddenly felt free to explore the library and to read things that I wasn't being taught in school. Somehow when I was in school, it was like you weren't supposed to do that. But now I began to read books about theology and anthropology and all kinds of things that I had an interest in, and there was no guidelines, and I felt wonderful. It was free, and I thought I can learn anything I want to learn because it's all here, it's all written down in these books. And of course, there was a time when it was not in books. And here's all the information that man has accumulated since he's been on the planet is right here at my disposal. And all you have to do is to know how to read. And if you know how to read, you can learn anything. So I spent a considerable amount of time at the library.
So the library, books, they've always been important to you. Did your mother encourage you to read as a child?
No, she encouraged, she taught me. Okay. She taught all of us how to read. I learned how to read 5 years old. I was a good reader. I had my library card, and I was reading 3rd grade books. And I remember when I went to Letchie High School, they would take me up to the 3rd grade and stand me in front of the class, and there was this little kindergarten kid who was going to read, you know, from your books. And I remember doing that. So reading was, I don't know, I recognized the words. And I remember learning the word breakfast. And it was 2 words that made one. I became very excited. And I think is right then I decided that I was going to be a writer, because you could take these words and make things out of them.
What were your earliest writing experiences? I mean, was it doodling at home, in school?
The earliest writing experiences I actually can remember was writing poems for Nancy Ireland, who was one of my classmates at St. Richard's School, whom myself and all the rest of the boys in the school was in love with. And I wrote these poems. I wouldn't put my name to them. I've since learned, to put my name to them. But that's really I remember. And then I had a teacher in 6th grade, Sister Mary Christopher, who was very, very encouraging and would allow me to write things and read them to the class. So I began to write little stories and things, and then she would let me take time out of the class and let me read them, and I found that very encouraging.
I'd like to read a quote to you that I read and get you to respond or elaborate on it. The quote is, "When I moved to St. Paul for the first time, I was removed from the hill. I could finally hear its voice." What did you mean by that? What was the voice you heard?
I think it's like, for instance, you can't, the saying that you can't see the forest for the trees. And when I was in Pittsburgh and I was trying to write, I was trying to write, in my short stories, I have very little dialogue because I couldn't write dialogue. And what I discovered that what I was doing was I didn't see any value in the way that blacks spoke, and I was trying to change that. I was trying to change their speech patterns, trying to change the internal logic of their thinking and their grammar to fit it into the correct way of speaking, more or less. And when I moved to St. Paul, and not being around the voices of the people every day, I suddenly began to hear them.
Okay.
And in hearing them, I recognized that there's a beauty, and that there's a poetry, and that there's a rhythm, and this is fine the way it is. It's beautiful. It does not have to be changed. And it was only when I began to realize, when I recognized that I didn't have to change it, that I could really use it the way I heard it, and the way I had been hearing it all my life, that I began to write plays made up out of this dialogue.
So the Lynne Hayes Freeland Show was about way more than just big names and celebrities. It was often about telling stories that impacted our daily lives, stories that looked inside the community, like the time I met a guy by the name of Kevin. You'll want to hear his story coming up.
To the girl with the best voice in broadcast, Lynne, I am so happy for you. Working with you on Vibrations was by far some of my best days at KDKA. My most vivid memories are sitting in the studio and you strolling in with a handful of papers and giving me those last-minute notes about our next guest. I so value your input. You were a calming force, and I want to thank you for making me and the show always look good. Now, with your great voice, your good looks, and your smart production skills, it is no surprise that you eventually took over the show and made it even better. Congratulations, Lynne, on an amazing career at KDKA. Sending you a big virtual hug. Good luck, and I can't wait to join you on the beach.